Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Hoss Talks Voss. I'm here with Matthias Crauwels from Pythian, a community member who has spoken at many Percona Lives and is a prolific blogger, and has established himself in the MySQL community, helping a lot of different people as he's doing consulting work around MySQL for Pythian. Hello, Matthias. How are you doing?
Hey, Matt. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. And so how was the weather there in Belgium?
It's a bit colder this week. It was very hot last week, but then it was also hot in the night, so you couldn't sleep well. But now it's a lot cooler, so it's actually pretty decent now. So
Good. Well, that's good. And so I did want to give a shout out to Matthias's guitars, which are cool. And as you watch this video, if you're watching live, I have the no background, so behind, as you watch the video, like it'll just be the floating background, my floating head, whereas you get the cool guitars. If you're just listening and you don't see, Matthias has guitars behind him, which is way cooler, and it makes me jealous that I need to rearrange my office and how I record. So
yeah. My wife was a bit angry of the location that I put them initially, because there's a stairs coming up right behind it. But I thought it was cool to put them there. So
yes, and now you have proof. It's recorded.
Yes.
So you can say, look, other people think this is cool.
Yes, I will show her that.
Yeah. So, Matthias, maybe just give people who aren't familiar with you, haven't heard you speak, the briefest of overviews about you.
So I'm Matthias. I live in Belgium. I've been working for Pythian for the last 4 years almost, and I'm a MySQL DBA. And I've spoken on many Percona Lives, initially mostly about high availability, in the last few talks about other things like SL Linux and backups and things like that.
So you like to handle those topics that sometimes people are like, oh my God, those are boring, but they're so needed, right?
Yes.
Let's be honest, security and backups are, two things that people don't like to think about, but they have to think about.
Yeah, it's not the most sexy of topics if you talk about those, but it's really needed, and especially the SL Linux talk. It came from something that we encountered in our daily work, and typically what we do is Lefred once asked me and told me life is too short for SL Linux, and we what we usually do is we turn it off. But then we had a compliance team coming back and said, you can't turn it off in our environment. And so we had to learn how to deal with it. And so I had some research about it and decided to write a conference talk about it.
Well, and that's funny because I remember back in the day. So, those who don't know, I used to do what Matthias does, which is consulting. And so my job was helping customers and everything else. And I remember when SE Linux was introduced, and it was like, what is this and why is it killing my database? And so, yes, the old school was turn this off because it just doesn't work. And I can relate to the life is too short for it, but you're right. Compliance teams, now are requiring a lot more security measures in order to secure their databases. Nobody likes to see their data leak. Now, interestingly enough, most data problems, data leaks, security issues, end up not necessarily being, something that would have been prevented from SE Linux per se. Most of them are because people are kind of, they don't know that they should set a password. They've taken backups and left them unencrypted on S3 buckets. They've left their applications, wide open. So it's more like they've got this giant, neon sign that says, "Come on in.
Enter here."
Yeah, enter here. Yeah. Back entrance for, free data, right? And so, but, as you started to look at some of those SE Linux things, what were some of the things that kind of surprised you?
So for MySQL, out of the box, it really kind of works. So the default SLinux that's deployed with most Linux editions that I tried just allows the right things for MySQL to be in place. So if you don't change like a data directory or port, it should just work out of the box. The trouble starts when you start moving things around to different locations. Like if some clients that we have like to have their data in /data instead of var lib MySQL, and then that's where the problem starts if you have to use SLinux and keep it on. So then MySQL won't start, and you're like there. Why won't you start? I did everything right, and the first few times it takes you a little bit of time to figure out. Oh right, that's a Linux, and then usually you can then quickly turn it off to test. But then if you have to continue working on that, then you have to figure out the right policies in the right context, put everything in place, then make sure you apply everything correctly. So that was a bit of a search. I wrote that presentation initially for FOSDEM in Brussels, I think 2 years ago now, and then I also submitted for Percona Live I think last year, and then I presented it there also. So
Yeah, and both talks are actually online.
yeah,
So you can get them on YouTube if you are interested in avoiding any sort of issues with SE Linux. Now, in your travels as a consultant, are there other things that you've seen people do or implement from a security perspective to keep their data secure in addition to SE Linux?
SE Linux is still something that mostly gets turned off, in my opinion. It's just some customers that require it. Security-wise, mostly the databases are in a secure network where there's no entry from outside unless you have the correct VPN and accounts, or you use some kind of jump host to get access to it. But really special measurements for security, I haven't seen much. So we have clients that use LDAP authentication for MySQL, which is a convenient way of keeping your not having shared passwords. Let's go there. That's something that I was very surprised to find when I started as a consultant, that many companies still use shared passwords for us as consultants entering. So they created like a Python account, and we all have to use the same account. And whenever we onboard people, I try to tell them like avoid that, because every time a consultant leaves, we have to all go change the passwords, and it's a hassle. So just create like a personal account. If someone leaves, you can just log that account, and nothing can access it anymore.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of people, depending on the size of the company, you start to implement those additional things. Like larger companies typically do quite a bit of auditing, so having a shared account really screws up the ability to audit, right?
Sure.
So you can't say, Matt went in and deleted this data, or did this stuff that he shouldn't have.
Yeah,
And
true.
so keeping that shared account is not necessarily a good thing. But even a lot of applications end up having shared accounts. And the bigger that you go, the more that you start to see some of those changes. So encrypted backups obviously are something that is a recommendation, especially if you're going to push things out to the cloud. Like I mentioned, there's just so many S3 buckets that are just exposed with full backups of data.
People think that no one can access it because no one knows the URL, but URL crawlers are very good these days, and they can figure out a lot of things. So, yeah.
Well, there's people who just that's all they do is they go out there and they look. And now some of them are white hats because they're looking for security issues, and helping people avoid them. Other people are looking for data to resell, bustling business.
It's a very big business with selling that data and trying to hold you ransom with ransomware until you pay a lot of money to a hacker for giving you a decryption key, which might not even work if you pay. So it's very, very dangerous. And we experienced that with one of our customers where they were running MySQL on a Windows server, and they were held hostage by someone who encrypted their file system, and they couldn't access their data anymore. And we said like, yeah, they came to us like, can you help us? And we were like, yeah, where's your backups? And they were like, we don't have backups. So we were like, nothing you can really do at that point.
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's unfortunate because
Yeah.
those security issues that cause that, and they've just been on the rise. But once you have those, that exposed entry, all hands are off. Now, I'll get back to back in the day, when I started at MySQL, one of the people who I had to shadow was Monty Taylor, and I remember Monty telling me, the security in MySQL is completely secondary, or it doesn't really matter if you don't secure your operating system, and if someone gets access to your network, they're gonna get your data some way or somehow.
Yeah.
And that's true, right? Because the MySQL setup could on that machine that you mentioned, that Windows machine, could have been totally secure, but they just encrypted the file system and like locked people out. So
True.
And there wasn't any backup. So what are you gonna do?
Well, what can you do at that point? There's just nothing you can do. You can try to brute force and decrypt things, but that will take ages to get into that. So
Yeah, and it's often that human error that kind of like somebody clicked at something they shouldn't have, somebody opened up something they shouldn't have, and it's caused a cascading impact across the machines and the systems. And I think that's where like your other talk, which is specifically on backups and kind of the backup landscape, is interesting, because not only do you need to secure your systems for the security issues and make sure you have a backup in case there's something that gets exposed, and make sure that those are secure, but also you have to ensure that you've got backups for when there is a actual crash or something that happens, and it's critical.
it's just like the chat you had with Pep a few weeks ago. You were also talking about backups, and he was telling you like, you don't need backups until you need them.
Yeah. And he made the really great point that it's not about the backups, it's about the recovery.
Yeah.
Like backups don't matter.
That's also one of my first slides in this talk about the backups. If you don't test your backups, if you don't try to recover them on a regular basis, you don't have backups. We consider you don't have backups.
Yeah, and I've talked about this before, that I worked, or I didn't work personally. We had when I was running consulting, we had a customer who came to us, and they were a really big social media company, unicorn status, like $1 billion, right? Mm-hmm. And they had moved data centers from data center A to B a few months earlier and forgot to turn on the backups. And after doing that, someone ran a Ruby migration, and it dropped the tables and recreated them or something similar to that, and wiped out their data. And they're like, "Oh my God, everything's gone." And they went to go get the backups, there weren't any. Mm-hmm. And I remember we did a lot of forensic data recovery to get them up, but they were out for 4 days. And after a 4-day outage, within 6 months of that, they were out of business.
Yeah, probably. I can imagine.
And I mean, like that's a crazy, story, a crazy impact. But it happens quite a bit.
And that's not a small company where there's only one DBA forgetting something. That's just an entire organization missing checks to
It's not that, like, again, they had the backup process, they had the backup scripts. It's just you made a small change, or a big change in this case, but like moving from data center A to B. And the old data center still had the backups running there, and but that data wasn't updated.
Same thing can happen on a small change. If you like have one server that's due for decommissioning because it's out of warranty, and you need to move your database to another, and you forget to turn on the backup on the new database server, then you can run into trouble.
Well, yeah, and I've seen that as well as failover systems. Kind of like flip around, right? So, maybe you've got a machine offline for maintenance that happens to be the machine that you use, take backups on.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
It's a problem. we always try to have at least a few locations where backups can be taken, and then we usually write a script to check whether what's the most recent backup and where it was taken, and we keep track of that. And so if one of those servers fails, then another one is scheduled to pick it up. And also we have monitoring on the log files and to check the age of the log file. So if the file is 2 days old, an alert gets triggered, and someone will have to go check to see, or it will keep paging them. Yeah, but it's the only way to ensure that people follow up on those alerts, because if you don't and you just get an email, I'll check that next week because I'm working on something right now, and then next week it was delayed or something else, and then suddenly you're 3-4 weeks without backups. And
well, and this is where it gets kind of interesting. So, a lot of people will forgo backups because they've got the redundancy on the file system and an external file system. So if the machine goes away or the machine crashes, they'll just mount the EBS volumes in another location. And, since Amazon, will take copies behind the scenes of their EBS files, it protects their data. So what do you say to those people? Now, I know what I would say, but, like when you run into a situation like that, what do you think?
Usually those kind of setups are more for like high availability and not for disaster recovery, because when disaster strikes, when Amazon has a data center burning down, it's not happening regularly, but it happens, then you still lose all that data. Or less impactful than Amazon burning down a data center might be a developer dropping a table and it gets replicated through your entire system and the data is gone on all of the servers. You might have a delayed replica, but what are the chances for you knowing within the time frame for that delay that there's something wrong? If you delete a table, it can be that your application starts erroring, and then something is wrong. But if you delete some records and you don't immediately know, then what do you do?
Well, and this is where it's interesting when you talk about the deletes and you talk about that cascading impact. I think that some people will have that delayed replica. They will have something that they can quickly fail over to.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned a good point, which is people don't think of the recovery time that it takes to actually diagnose and figure out.
Yeah.
Right. It's not obvious within like a 5-minute or a 10-minute window that it's the application's erroring. What happened? Where and the fact that you have to log in, check what is going on, and then find out it's table X was had its data deleted or whatever, and why it had it deleted, and then stop the application, and then all of these things take time.
Yeah.
And I have seen this before where people have relied on a delayed replica, and as they rely on that delayed replica, they'll have an hour delay or something. It takes them an hour and 30 minutes to find and diagnose the problem, and the replica's already like, whoop, it's gone.
It's gone.
Right? So that whole recovery from that replica.
But even if you diagnose it before that replica is in trouble, you stop replication there, and you have one server that has the data that's correct, but you need to redistribute all that data to all of the other replicas in your environment, because one server usually cannot serve the traffic, so you need to recreate basically an entire new topology from that one replica in order for you to get started fresh, and that might not take minutes, but that might take hours or even days to get it fully running and provisioned. So look at the outage that GitHub had, the big one in 2018, where they had a failover by orchestrator to the other data center, and then they realized that like about 40 minutes in, we have to fail back, and it took them 12 hours to prepare the environment to get ready again. So it's a risk that's there if you use automation, and if you all the safeguards you have in place, but there's still always a risk if you do things in an automated way, because automation can fail. Automation can trigger other problems. So yeah, it's
Yeah, and I mean, I think that that automation triggers other problems is a whole other area.
yeah, true.
I mean, I've done a lot of looking and digging into outages, especially in cloud providers, but also large SaaS providers over the last few years, and it's so amazing that as we start to automate more and more of our operations, which we have to because we're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of machines, we have to rely on that automation. It is so easy for you to make one small mistake that's replicated 10,000 times now.
Yes.
Right?
I know. It's my comment about automation was not at all to stop people from using automation, because automation is the way forward. We have to automate ourselves out of a job as consultants. That's basically what we do. But yeah, the point is to have enough security checks, to have enough safeguards, to have enough points where you can say, oh, stop right here because this is going wrong. And that is the hard part of getting your automation to work the proper way. 9 out of 10 times it does perfectly what you ask it, but that one time it
yeah. And I mean, I think this is where it's really interesting, because I think that we've gotten a little less focused, or maybe a little lazy as a society when it comes to testing and making assumptions on hey, this worked in this smaller environment, this worked in this and making those assumptions that it should just continue to work. And when we look at like modern application design, you're looking at a lot of continuous integration, continuous deployment. You're looking at constantly deploying changes, and you're constantly deploying those changes potentially across hundreds or thousands of servers.
Yes.
It's almost impossible to do a test on all the permutations, with all the workloads across that size of an organization.
Yeah, we are currently working with a very sizable client where we are in charge of their testing environment. So they hired us on to fix their testing environment because their developers were really in trouble, because the internal team cares about the production environment. Of course, that's what brings in the money, what makes the revenue. So keeping production running is their prime target and their prime concern. But the testing environment is equally important, because if the testing environment is like down for a day, they might have X number of developers sitting there twiddling their thumbs because we can't work because the database is down, the testing database. And even it goes one step further, because they have all of their systems are replicated in their testing environment, and then they start while they're developing, they just need their own database to talk to. But once they start going into integration testing and running their CI pipeline to see if their change will actually work in the rest of the ecosystem, then there might be a database down somewhere on the other end of the system, which breaks their pipeline, and then they're still stuck. So it's a challenging task to do proper testing, to do proper setup of your environments. But it's really necessary. And testing costs money. Backups cost money. But in the end, if you don't have backups and you have a disaster like that customer that I talked about with the ransomware, they went out of business because they lost all their data, so they couldn't provide anything to their customers anymore, so they just went bankrupt.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, and these are relatively small in terms of one little tiny system, in a what could be a very large corporate network, but it has the impact of potentially making or breaking your entire organization.
Yep.
And that's a really powerful and really an exclamation point on why you need to be so certain that not only is that system really secure, but you have the redundancies in place to make sure that you can survive those relatively bad days. And not only that, think of the impact on your customer base. I mean, there's a cascading impact that I don't think people, realize. Okay, so this one company went out of business. Well, maybe they had 300 employees. That's 300 families. That's potentially, a couple thousand people who are impacted by that company going out of business. Then their customers, depending on what they're doing, that could be, 500 customers who are relying on that for their business. So now their business is impacted for, how many ever weeks. The data that they used or that they stored is no longer accessible, so they can't take that data and be portable and move it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think that we're building a very fragile ecosystem here, especially when you look at some of these companies in the SaaS space. When you're saying like, oh, I'm going to outsource my payroll, or I'm going to outsource my benefits to this company, you're relying on them to not only secure the data, but also have those redundancies in place. And if they don't, then you might not get paid. I might not get paid, right?
Imagine that payroll company having that kind of issue where they're not available for 4 or 5 days, where they cannot do payment processing. How many people are waiting for their salary to be paid out? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So the cascading impact's massive.
Yeah. So a giant snowball rolling down the hill.
Wow, this has turned into a very depressing talk.
We have to laugh more.
We need to go to a more interesting topic, right, or something a bit more uplifting. So, Matthias, maybe we can end on this here because we want to end on the high note. Is there something that you're starting to look at, play with, test out that's really exciting? I like to ask people about some new technologies or new things they're learning. And have them share some of the interesting, fun things.
I made a very blunt statement yesterday in our team meeting, and I told people, if you want to run MySQL on Kubernetes, you're gonna want to run Vitess.
Oh, okay.
Because they do manage the entire solution. The sharding is something you get extra. But you don't have to use it if you run just your high available cluster on Vitess. It's taken care for you for high availability. It will do backups. It will do online schema changes. It will do all the things for you right now. So, and that's something that I'm really interested in starting to use much more about. So that's for me that's the promising thing in the MySQL ecosystem right now.
Cool. Yeah, and I mean, I think that gets back to that automation, and it gets back to being able to, as you said, automate yourself out of a job, which I don't think will actually happen. You'll just automate the more mundane things away, because I think that there will always be a role for troubleshooting and trying to find out why those applications are being impacted by those gremlins. So I do think that Vitess is a great technology. It's something that a lot of people are starting to look into. I think that the whole operator movement in a Kubernetes space, will start to emerge even more over the next year. I think that having the capabilities to just automatically run kind of your own mini database as a service is critical because let's be honest, when you look at these cloud providers, their growth in the database as a service space, it's really a powerful message for developers to say, I click a button and it just magically happens. Yeah. Now, as a former DBA, as someone in the infrastructure space, I go, oh my God, you click a button and you never touch it again. Like that's bad because everything's going to change. But I do like the fact that we're getting more options to make it easier to get started and get rid of those boring things.
Yep. True. Yeah, the easy tasks are already done by the cloud providers, and we just get the exciting challenges of fixing the difficult ones.
Yeah. All right. Well, Matthias, thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed our chat. I did. And if you want to check out any of Matthias's talks, they are up on YouTube or on the Percona channel, our Percona website.
Yep.
you can also check out Matthias's blog on the Pythians blog space. So he does blog quite regularly as well. Mm-hmm. So, but thanks for joining.
All right. Bye, Matt. Take care.
Wow, what a great episode that was. We really appreciate you coming and checking it out. We hope that you love open source as much as we do. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, tune in to next week's episode. We really appreciate you coming and talking open source with us.